The author's note. On March 3rd and 4th, 1859, the largest auction of slaves in American history took place in Savannah, Georgia. Some accounts put the numbers of slaves sold at 429, while others put it 436. The slaves were the property of Pierce Butler, the husband of the English actress and abolitionist Fanny Kemble, who is remembered today for her Journal of a Residence on the Georgia Plantation. In 1836, Butler and his brother John inherited 2 plantations in Georgia, one on St. Simon's Island and the other on Butler Island. Over the next 20 years, Butler would lose most of his wealth, approximately $700,000, in the stock market and through gambling. In an attempt to satisfy his enormous debts, Butler had to sell his mansion in Philadelphia and other properties. However, this proved insufficient. The only other property Butler owned was slaves. Half of the 900 he and his brother had inherited from their grandfather, Major Pierce Butler, a senator from South Carolina, and a signer of the Declaration of Independence, who was also responsible for the Fugitive Slave Clause in the Constitution. 450 slaves, John Butler's half, would remain on the plantation. Pierce's half would be sold. The 429 or 436 to be sold were placed on railroad cars and steamboats and taken to the Breck racetrack in Savannah, where they were put in empty horse stalls. On the day of the auction it started raining, and for the 2 days of the sale it rained torrentially. However, soon after the auction ended, the rain stopped and the sun came out. The sale became known as the weeping time. The highest price paid was $6,180 for a woman and her 5 adult children, while $1,750 was the highest price paid for one person, and $250 the lowest. Butler gained $303,850. I am grateful to my editor, Garen Thomas, for bringing The Weeping Time to my attention, as it was a story I was not familiar with. I have taken the facts of that story to create a paradigm for the thousands of slave auctions that took place in this country. The only characters taken from the historical account are Pierce Butler and his daughters Sarah and Frances, the auctioneer, and Fanny Kemble. The marriage of Pierce Butler and Fanny Kemble ended in divorce for numerous reasons, one being her refusal to be a subservient wife, and another her opposition to slavery. When she married him, she did not know he owned slaves. Butler received custody of their 2 children, each of whom shared the views of slavery held by one of her parents. Sarah was opposed to slavery, while Frances defended the institution, and after the Civil War, Frances returned to Butler Island with her father and ran the plantation under the sharecropping system. She subsequently wrote 10 Years on a Georgia Plantation Since the War, an apologia for slavery and the Southern way of life. This book takes many of the facts from the lives of Pierce Butler and Fanny Kemble and their children, but is not a historical recreation of their lives. Rather, history and fiction have been blended. During my research on the slave auction known historically as the Weeping Time, I happened across a remarkable document. What became of the slaves on a Georgia plantation? Great Auction of Slaves at Savannah, Georgia, March 2nd and 3rd, 1859, a sequel to Mrs. Kemble's journal. This is a pamphlet from the David A. P. Murray collection housed at the Library of Congress and available over the World Wide Web. The pamphlet gives a detailed description of the auction and gives the names of some of the slaves and the prices for which they were sold. I have included these in the story without change. Also taken from the pamphlet is the story of Jeffrey and Dorcas, as well as the fact that Pierce Butler gave each of his slaves a silver dollar at the end of the auction. The interlude that gives the end to the story of Jeffrey and Dorcas is based on numerous true accounts of the attempts of former slaves to be reunited with loved ones. History is not only an accounting of what happened when and where. It also includes the emotional biographies of those on whom history imposed itself with a cruelty that we can only dimly imagine. This book is another in my attempts to make real those who did not have the opportunity to tell their stories for themselves. Julius Lester.